Hi, welcome back to the Microsoft track. Got Marcus Robinson now. He's going to be telling you all about Azure and containers. So take it away.
Great, good afternoon. Before we get started, what is this session and what is it not? It's definitely not a DevOps culture talk. It's very much technology-based and it's very much product-based. The intention over the next, 40 minutes or so is to run through the options on Azure for running containers. So whatever your containers are doing, be it microservice, be it websites, look at some of the different options for running those containers. So we're going to run through the options with some demos, a lot of content. I don't expect it all to go in, but hopefully it'll just give you some ideas that you can go away and learn about later. Okay. Why am I here talking about containers? This is a survey from 2016. 62% of people adopting containerization report reduction in mean time to remediation. 13 times more software releases, eliminates the works on my machine issue. Yeah, we've heard a lot of this. Yeah, so you're here to listen to me, so there must be something good about containers. And what might we use them for? Okay, we can use containers for a number of things. We can use the same containerization technologies for containerizing legacy apps, doing lift and shift, looking at introducing microservices, or doing greenfield new projects. One thing I'd like to point out at this stage is containers is one technology. There's a lot of other technologies out there, Azure services, platform as a service, software as a service. Containers fit certain problems. They're not the right technology for every problem. Just remember that. Just because we've got a lot of buzz around it doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing for you, but it's cool. Who's familiar with Docker? Show of hands. Most people, okay. This is those of you who maybe aren't so familiar. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, Docker images, what we start our containers from, archive of file layers, which represents our full application we're going to run. Containers, that's actually what the process sits in and runs in. That's what we execute. Docker engine is what sits on the server operating system to enable us to deploy containers using a Docker client. And we're going to talk about registry services, which is where we send our images to be held, like a source code repository, I guess, in a way, and then we can pull them down and use them and run them as and when we need to. But hopefully, that's revision for a lot of you guys, but we will touch on some of those. Containers are now in the Windows world and Linux world. They've been around in the Linux ecosystem for a number of years. Last couple of years, we started to see them emerge with Windows. The nice thing is with Windows containers, we can interact with them in the exact same way as we interact with containers on Linux operating systems. We can use the Docker clients, the Docker APIs, which is nice. So through this presentation, some of my demos are Linux, some are Windows. I'm trying to do Windows where possible, but some of the services aren't quite ready for Windows, in which case I'll use Linux. But you'll see the technology and tooling that I use for both is now and identical. You've probably heard build, ship, and run. It's something Docker talk about a lot. We build the container. You can build that wherever you want. I'm sure people are using lots of different development environments. Purpose of this session, when I do build containers, use VS Code. We're not going to do a lot of building containers because we're going to focus on running them. I'm going to ship my containers up to Azure Container Registry and then show you how to run them. I'm going to cover Azure Container Instances, Container Service, Azure Service Fabric, touch on some of the partner solutions, Azure Batch, and Azure Web App for Containers. So it's quite a lot, and we've got 40 minutes to go, so need to get going. Azure Container Registry. So this is a private Docker registry that sits on Azure. When you've built your images on your local machine or through your CI/CD platform, you can push them up to the registry. You can authenticate it with Azure Active Directory, so we can do security based on Azure service principles. Something new, we've got webhooks. So what a webhook enables us to do is, if we want something to be triggered when we update an image, be it a new deployment of a website or a new deployment of a container, as we push that image up, that webhook will call something that will grab that new image. And we'll look at that later. We'll see that. There's two versions of Azure Container Registry. The classic version and the managed version. The classic version has been around and available and supported. So you see in the bottom right of my slides, I've got classic and managed and GA. GA stands for generally available, which means it's out there, it's supported. Other things are in preview, which means you can give them a go, kick the tires, but they're not supported. So the classic version has been around for a while. and is supported. The managed version, which includes the Azure Active Directory authentication and the webhook integration, is still in preview, but it works pretty well, and I've been using it with customers without any problems. Yeah, so my first demo. Very simply, and those of you who are familiar with Docker, I'm going to build a couple of containers, one Windows and one Linux, and ship them up to Azure Container Registry. I've got 2 servers I'm working on. I've got a Ubuntu VM on Azure and a Windows VM on Azure, and that's where I'm building my images. I do use, when I'm developing and doing actual projects, I use Docker for Windows a lot, but when I'm coming doing sessions like this, because I don't want to rely on my machine, I use some servers up in the cloud. So I'm just going to connect my Docker client to my Windows server instance. So hopefully we'll see on there. There we go, server data center I'm working on. I'm going to build my image. It's very simple. And I'm tagging it with the name of my repository. So this is my registry name, and this is my repository name. Okay, just wait for that to expand the zip file. And you'll see this running later on. I've already logged into the registry, so hopefully once this is built, I can just push it up. Any moment. Lots of live demos. Hopefully they'll all go well. I've got my fingers and toes crossed. Perhaps I should sacrifice something to the demo gods. Come on. Nearly there. Come on. What I'm going to do is... There we go. Took a little bit of a while. There we go. So let's push that up. Most of the layers are already up there, or they might all be. So it's just to show you, we're using Azure Container Registry here in the same way we would use any Docker registry. Okay, it's standard. Okay, using the same Docker command. So that's my Windows one done. And let's do my Linux one, switch into my Ubuntu machine. Docker info, just to show you that. There we go. Yep. Build and tag my image with Linux website. Okay, and push that up there. Nearly there. As I say, there's nothing special about this. I just want to show you, look, that's what we're doing, and that's the containers I'm going to be using as we go through this session. First thing we're going to talk about is infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, virtual machines. Okay. You can deploy VMs on Azure from the marketplace. There's lots of Windows images, Linux images, and they have Docker engine pre-installed, so we can connect up to them and deploy containers on them. Great for dev test scenarios, okay? But we need to remember with infrastructure as a service, we need to support and manage that operating system. Also, if it's single VMs, we've got no high availability, anything like that. VMs build by the compute resource, so depending on the size of VM we're deploying, it's built by the minute. So you've got things like Docker on Ubuntu server, Windows Server 2016 data center with containers, CoreOS. So you can just go deploy them and get up and running with Docker pretty quickly. Then we've got some partner solutions also use virtual machines. Okay. So Docker Enterprise Edition includes Docker Trusted Registry, their universal control plane. I'm sure if you go and speak to them on the stand downstairs, they'll tell you a lot more about that. Red Hat OpenShift's container platform. Mesosphere have a DCOS solution in there. We've got Pivotal Cloud Foundry, Rancher. All these various vendors have got solutions in the Azure marketplace. You just go and deploy them. Dead easy. Okay. But ultimately, they are all virtual machines. Under there, some of the vendors do offer levels of management. But IaaS and virtual machines have been around for a long time, so we want to get on some of the newer things going on. Azure container instances. So these were announced, I think, maybe a month or two ago now. So we can now run containers on Azure without servers. Very much in preview. Okay, it's not supported yet. Just containers, no host virtual machines. We can deploy our container instances into container groups. So for those of you familiar with Kubernetes, it's like a Kubernetes pod. Okay, so we've got sidecar containers that are always deployed with our main container we can do. They can be used standalone. We can deploy using ARM templates or from the CLI. But the real intention is for them to be used by other services. And I'll come on to that later. Cool thing is they're built by the second. Okay, so rather by the minute, just when our container's running, we build by the second that it's running. And there's a small charge for creation as well. Yeah, so I'm going to show you running one of these containers on Azure container instances. Now, as I said, some of my demos are in Windows and some are in Linux. I need to switch over to Bash. when I'm using the Azure CLI, I'm going to use Windows Subsystems for Linux because that's what I live in when I use it. When I live in the Windows world, I use PowerShell. Azure Container Instances is only in the CLI at the moment. You could run that on Windows, but I run it in Windows Subsystems for Linux. Doesn't matter. At the moment, Windows ones take a little while to provision. So I'm just going to create a resource group on Azure to put these in. And I'm going to provision a Windows container. Now, the Windows ones at the moment take 3, 4, 5 minutes to spin up, which isn't ideal, but there's a lot of work going on to speed that up. The Linux ones are pretty damn quick. So I'm going to do one of both. I won't show you the Windows one running, because in the interest of time, but maybe at the end, or if people want to come see a bit more about it later, we can. So I've created my resource group, and I'm going to let's have a look. I'm going to create my container. So we can see here we're doing AZ container create, name of it, the image. Okay, the OS type is Windows. This is the key thing because it's a Windows container. And we can specify what the CPU and memory limits are on there. And it needs a public IP address. Okay, so that's started provisioning that. And at the same time, I'm just going to deploy Linux one because I know that will come up quicker. What you can see from the Windows one, when it's deployed, we've got an IP address. Yeah, so that's the IP address that container will be available on. Okay, and where are we going? So that Linux one started. So if I look at the state of it, I can see that it's currently, I'd say pending or running. Now it's pending, so I need to wait until that's running. What I can do though, is, while that's doing, show you it in the portal. So on the left, I've got my Azure container instances. And you can see I've got 2 container groups, one for Linux and one for Windows. And here it is. And you can see it says running now. And if I get the IP address, let's have a look at this. There we go. Copy that IP address, open up a tab. We've got our container running. No virtual machine required at all, which I think is pretty cool. If I look at the Windows one, it's still waiting because it takes a little time to provision. So there's a lot of work being done to improve that, but it won't be long before, hopefully, there's not much to be said between them. So that's Azure Container Instances, deploying containers with no VMs. Azure Container Service. Okay, so it's all very well deploying single containers and running them, be it on VMs or Azure Container Instances, but in the real world, we're not just going to have one container. We have microservices, lots of dependencies, and we want high availability. If we just run on one server and it goes, that container dies, we've got a problem. So we need some form of orchestration. So that's where Azure Container Service comes in. So Azure Container Service facilitates the deployment of the 3 main open source container orchestration systems, so Kubernetes, DCOS, and Swarm. Interact with them in the same way as you do if you deploy the open source project yourself. All we're doing is facilitating the deployment and some additional things like scaling and credential management. Linux containers are supported on all 3, generally available. Windows containers are currently in preview on Kubernetes and Swarm, I believe, and DCOS are working on it. But Mesosphere have also announced they're going to support Kubernetes, so we'll see where that goes. Azure Container Service, underneath it is still VMs, okay? And you see those in the portal. And you build for the compute resource used. There's no charge for the service, you just build for the servers that are running underneath. Looks a bit like this. So again, you can deploy it on-prem with Azure Stack. If you saw Jeffrey's talk this morning, you have VMs and VM scale sets sat on there that are deployed using an ARM template, Linux and Windows Server, whichever operating system you want. And then the orchestrator sits on top of there, and then the containers. So let's have a look. Let's come down here. So I've actually got a Windows set of Windows agents on Kubernetes. So I'm running this command here, ACS Kubernetes get credentials. Kubernetes uses something called a kubeconfig, and it's downloaded that to my local profile so I can authenticate with the cluster. So I'll wait for that to authenticate. Then I'm going to run a kubectl proxy, and what that's going to do is create a tunnel up to my cluster so I can browse the web portal just to show you what's going on. It's nicer on stage if you can see something that's a bit prettier. So let's open a new task. I'll use this one again. 2.7. Here we go. So this is the Kubernetes dashboard. And you're seeing here, node-wise, I've got 2 nodes. I've got the master node, which does the orchestration, and the agent. This is, for demo purposes, it's just got one agent, or worker, whatever you want to call it. In reality, you'd have a lot more, okay, for redundancy. And if I look at pods, you can see there's no pods running, so no containers actually running at the moment. So I'm just going to close that tunnel. And also, we can do the similar sort of thing through the command line. If I use kubectl get nodes, just down that. Hopefully, it'll come back and show me those same 2 nodes. Okay. I'm going to create deployment, which is a Windows website, and I'll show you that over here. So it's a deployment, and it's referring to my container that I pushed up to Azure Container Registry. It's defining what ports, and it's referencing the secret I've got stored in the Kubernetes cluster to enable access to Azure Container Registry. And I'm going to deploy a service, and what the service does is provides external access. Now, the nice thing about the service, so it's saying port 80 and load balancer. Well, so what this is actually knows, Kubernetes knows that it's on Azure, and it knows it's got to update an Azure load balancer. So if I come back to my portal, and let's have a look. If I go to Azure Container Services, and that's my Windows cluster, and look at this resource group, I'll see there's a load balancer in here. I think it's this one. If I look at load balancing rules, there's one on there at the moment, and what we should see, if I, I'll just point out again, so we've just got one rule on there at the moment. If I come down here, and let's just see how the deployment's going. Should be done. Okay, not available at the moment. Why is that not available? Let's check again. No, just let me check this. First demo, it's not going 100% to plan. There we go. Scaled up, scaling, count 1, progressing, rolling update, desired 1, available none. Wonder why that's not pulled. What I'm going to do. I'm not going to, because of interest of time, I'm going to spend too much time on there. But if let me run my service, I'll show you the service. Try again. So what we're going to show you, the service will, here we go, it's pending at the moment. What this will do is create an entry in the Azure load balancer. I'll go put public IP on there to provide access into the pod. Okay, so automatically, rather than having to go and update the load balancer, it does that automatically. Right, I'm going to move on because I'm going to show you some more Kubernetes stuff in a moment, which is a bit more interesting. So on there, we're running containers when it does come up on a virtual machine. But I showed you Azure container instances before, so why can't we get the two to work together? Well, the answer is yes, we can. So we have this ACI Connector. This is very much experimental. It's a project on GitHub. And what this does allows Kubernetes to deploy to Azure container instances. So we no longer need VMs for our agents. It registers into the Kubernetes control plane as a node, okay, with unlimited capacity. And gives us as much compute as we want. So we no longer have to think about how much memory, CPU do our VMs need. And we can mix and match. So Azure container instances are slightly more expensive than running containers on VMs. So if we've got long-running jobs, containers that are going to run for weeks and weeks, 24/7, it's cheaper to run them on VMs, but so we can mix and match. And it looks a bit like this. So we had my diagram I had before. And we can see we've now got the container instances that take out the need for the VMs and the operating system that's abstracted away from us. And this Kubernetes doesn't have to be on Azure. It could be on-prem. It could be on another public cloud. So let's jump on and have a look at that anyway. So at the moment, this is only on Linux. If I jump up and show you, there is a pull request, I think, at the moment for ACI connector. If I look at ACI Connector on GitHub, so if you want to give any of this a try, it's all on GitHub. If I look at the pull requests, there is a pull request on there for support for Windows containers, but it's not been merged yet. So let's jump back over here. So I'm going to connect to my Linux cluster, look at what nodes I've got, and again, it should be relatively straightforward. Okay, so if I do get nodes, okay, so you can see I've got my master and my agent, okay. And now what I'm going to do is deploy the ACI connector, which is a simple deployment container. Let's come over here and show you this one. That's going to have lost all my session variables, hasn't it? Let's see how we get on. I wasn't expecting that. Right. Okay, so just let me think what I need to do. I just need to run a couple of commands here to get my terminal back out, up and running. Oh, that's not bash, is it? There we go. Let's read that back in. Let's try that again. Need to make sure I get this right. Okay, let's come back over here. So let's come back to my Kubernetes cluster. Where was I? To download the credentials. Obviously didn't sacrifice enough to the demo gods. This is pulling down the credentials. There we go. Now if I run get nodes, we saw the two nodes, didn't you? I showed you that. So I was just about to deploy this connector. So I'm going to run my deployment there and show you the connector. A moment. That's the YAML file that's used to deploy that. So we can see here it's deployment, ACI connector, it's just one replica, and it's pulling down our ACI connector image off Docker Hub, and it takes in as environment variables the details of my Azure subscription, okay, and the region. So anything deployed to this connector will be provisioned to West Europe. Okay, so if I then run again get nodes, it wasn't on this one, was it? Okay, we see we've got this additional node, ACI connector. So it's as though it's a VM, but actually it's Azure container instances. So then if I'm going to just deploy a pod, which is a single container. Okay, and let's show you this. And when I deploy this pod in the YAML, I'm saying deploy to the ACI connector node. Okay. And if I do get pods, okay, it's running and we've got an IP address there, and if I go to the portal as well, come back to the portal, come back to my container instances, you'll see what Kubernetes has done has created a container group here. Just grab that IP. It's not quite running yet. Hopefully it will be in a second. It says waiting. I think there's an issue pulling some of these images. So when my shell's crashed, has it lost my credentials? Just bear with me one moment. I'm just going to check my credentials are saved in the. Otherwise, none of my authentication. So I've got my credentials saved in environment variable. When my shell's crashed, it's lost that environment variable. So I just need to check they're in there with one moment. And it is. Obviously, don't want to show it on screen. Yeah, that's right. Let's come switch back. Let's see if it's coming up there. Yep. Oh, there we go. So it just took a little bit of time to pull the image down. I'm just worried it wouldn't work. Okay, so you can see I've deployed a container on Azure container instances from Kubernetes, so I no longer need a VM to run my containers, which I think is pretty cool. Who uses Kubernetes or seeing Kubernetes here? A few people, so hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Okay, Service Fabric. Who's come across Service Fabric? Yeah, so more familiar to people in the Windows world maybe, especially if you use .NET and Visual Studio. It's an orchestration tool. Okay, it's great for microservices, and it has programming models, which I'll talk about briefly. Those of you who don't know what Service Fabric is, it's used to run a lot of the Azure services. Okay, a lot of Azure services sit on top of it. So you've got massive scale, things like Skype for Business, Cortana, IoT Hub. So it's really been tested with mission-critical workloads. Windows, generally available. Linux, it's in preview. Again, you don't pay for the service, just for the compute resources it consumes. You can install it on-prem, on any cloud you want. Okay. But what makes it a bit different is these programming models, such as reliable actors and reliable services. So they're native, they're not containers. This is native code that we can run on here. So we get organizations that are using these programming models, but then want to bring legacy apps onto the same platform, and they'll containerize their legacy apps so they can run alongside. Also, a lot of people are inherently from the Windows world like Service Fabric because it is, it's from the roots of Windows and runs and sits on Windows Server. The other nice thing with Service Fabric is, rather than with Kubernetes, we've got these YAML files that are slightly different. Service Fabric just can take Docker Compose files to deploy containers. So let me show you this. Okay, where's my Service Fabric demo? So first of all, just show you the Service Fabric portal. Actually, I need to be in PowerShell for this. Just thinking, that's fine. Okay, so this is Service Fabric running on Azure, and I've got 5 nodes there. I'm going to connect to my Service Fabric cluster. Okay, and then I'm going to deploy a new Service Fabric application using Compose. This Compose file, I'm going to specify my registry username and password, which actually won't be in my session state either, will they? So let me come back to my prep script and make sure I read that I'm in. Some people say I'm crazy for doing so many live demos, but I like to live on the edge. Okay, hopefully that's saved that in there. So now if we come back, go away Cortana. So where are we going? I'm going to deploy this Compose application. So let's deploy that there. Okay, and hopefully what we'll see pretty quickly, visual update. See, we've got an application on there. There we go. The application started provision, and it's pulling those images down. I'll just show you what's in the Compose file. It's the simplest Docker Compose file you've probably ever seen. References the container registry and that Windows website image, and how many replicas we want. And I've got 5 nodes, so it'll deploy 1 container on each node. Okay, which we can see it's done. Replicas, 1 replica. I'll gradually move up. But if I come back to my steps, I'm just going to bring up the DNS name of the Service Fabric cluster, and there we go. There's my Windows container running on Service Fabric. Okay, and just remove that so it's not there for next time. Okay, so that's Service Fabric. Right, Azure Web App for containers. So if we want to use containers to run websites, so single tier web front end, and then other tiers off the back, it might be SQL Azure, it might be Postgres MySQL. This is just a Linux service at the moment, but there's no servers required. The infrastructure is fully managed, so we don't get visibility of any VMs in Azure at all. Okay, it's all taken care of. And there's auto-scaling and load balancing in there, and other DevOps practices, things to enable DevOps practices, such as staging slots, rollback, testing in production, monitoring, performance testing. I'm going to show you some of those. So it's a very easy way to move your application forward and start doing some of these cool things that people are talking about. And you get integrated CI and CD using those webhooks from Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry. It's billed by the minute based on the app service plan and the number of instances. So as you scale, you get more instances of an app service plan, which underneath is a VM, ultimately. Yeah, so you can choose your container. So your container can come from, we have some built-in images that you can just deploy your code onto, such as Node.js, .NET Core, or you can use Azure Container Registry, Docker Hub, or your own private registry. And you specify the webhook. It gives you the webhook, and you pop that into Docker Hub. So when your Docker image updates, it will update the website. We can do auto-scaling, so we can set auto-scale rules, either manually, so we can increase the number of instances or reduce them. We can do it based on CPU percentage, so as CPU usage increases or decreases, we can increase or decrease the number of VMs back in the service. And we can do it based on schedules. So say, Saturday evening, you've got an advert going out and everything's going to be busy. We can say, look, at that time, we need to pre-prep lots of instances. Deployment slots, so we can deploy to a staging slot, and then when we're ready, we can swap that to a production slot. Okay, it does a virtual IP swap, so there's no downtime when it does that. And we can also route traffic. So you can do testing in production. So say you've got your website in your staging slot, your web application, so it could be an internal application, and you've made some changes, but you don't want to roll that out to everybody. Just start with 5%, monitor it, see what happens. If it's good, increase it to 10%, 20%, gradually roll it out. And if it's not, we can just back it out and we turn the traffic off, which is quite nice. Okay, so let me show you Azure Web App for Containers. Okay, so I'm going to connect up to my Ubuntu server. And I've got a Docker image here. Sorry, Docker file. It's a website, very simple. I'm just going to change the code in here to say, hello WinOps. Save that. Okay, I'm going to build that image. Oh, I know where that is. I bet I'm not logged into Azure, am I? What's going wrong? That's right. I'm in PowerShell, not Bash. Log in Azure to Azure. There we go. All these demo scripts are available on GitHub. I'll give you the URL again at the end. So I'm logging in, selecting my right Azure subscription, and I just need to get the IP address of that Ubuntu VM so I can connect to it. Right, try again. So let's try building that image. That's better. So it's going to build that image, okay, and then going to tag that image with the name, with the tag prod for production. Okay, and then push it up to Azure Container Registry. Now, what I'm going to do is create a new container web app. So I click on New. Again, you can do this through the CLI, but I'm going to do it for the portal. It's easier for you guys to see. I'll call it temp WinOps. I put TMP in front of everything I'm doing in demos. Tip for people that want, learning on Azure and things. I have a script and automation account runs each night. Anything that starts TMP gets deleted. Okay. So I'm going to create a new app service plan. As you can see, we get a choice of region. Just going to put it in West Europe. And a pricing tier. And the different pricing tiers give us different facilities, such as storage, backup, how many staging slots and things we have, SSL support. So I'm just going to leave it on the default, on S1. Configure a container. So this is a nice place. I'm going to say I'm going to use Azure Container Registry. It knows I've got a container registry in my subscription. And it knows I've got an image in here called Linux website. And I've just tagged it with production. So I hit OK. Hit create. Okay, it should start creating that. Let's wait for that deployment to finish up. This shouldn't take too long. So what it's doing is spinning up a VM, which is our app service plan, although we don't actually see that through the portal, and spinning up our container. We can put multiple web apps, multiple containers on a single app service plan. Okay, so that price you saw, those instances of app service plan, you could have X number of web apps according to the tier we're using. Let's have a look at this deployment's doing. There we go, it's deployed. Go to resource. I'm aware I'm covering a lot of different technologies here, but it's just to give you an idea of some of the different things we can do with Azure and containers. So if I jump to that URL, first time it's got to pull the image, so it will take a little bit of time. While that's doing, I'll show you the GUI for the container deployment here. You can enable continuous deployment for Azure Container Registry, and it automatically sets the webhook up. So if I was to update that image, it would update that. Scaling, if we wanted to scale out. If I enable auto scale, just so some of the metrics we can scale on. So we can scale our app service plan using things such as CPU percentage, memory percentage, disk queue length, etc. Okay, so let's come back up and see if this is deployed. I'm just going to open this in a private session just because I know it does sometimes cache it. Yep. Oh, there we go. Yep, so that's deployed. So that's a nice, easy way to get your containers up and running on Azure and not have to worry about servers, orchestrators, or anything at all. But it's Linux only at the moment. Right, last technology. I've got about 10 minutes, so I'm doing all right. Azure Batch. So what Azure Batch is for parallel processing. So you've got lots of jobs that need to run in parallel. So rather than containers that run 24/7 permanently, it's just jobs. So it's a job scheduling that manages the cluster to allow applications or algorithms to run in parallel at scale. Customers that use this aren't just deploying 1 or 2 VMs, they're generally deploying hundreds or thousands to do batch processing. Works with Windows or Linux. There's no charge for batch, you just pay for the resources used. What sort of things is batch used for? Things like rendering, deep learning, engineering simulations. I was working with a customer they were doing fluid dynamics on cars, airflow over cars and things using Azure Batch, lots of processing. So batch ultimately is just VMs. It deploys some VMs to run the workload on. Once the task is all finished, it gets rid of the VMs. But if we want to use Docker with batch, we've got something called Batch Shipyard, which again is an open source project. And what this does, it deploys Docker Engine to the VMs that are spun up, pulls down our container image, which is going to do the processing to those nodes. We have what's called recipes. So a recipe specifies the number of nodes we need to spin up in our pool, and the Docker image, and how we're going to create the tasks. Okay, so I think the best way, I'll show you this graphic and then I'll do a quick demo. So we have our container image, and Batch Shipyard deploys that to each of the VMs. We create a job, create a task queue. Those are then allocated out. The processing happens. It grabs data from an input storage location, could be a file share, on-prem, could be Azure files, and pass it to the output directory. So I'm going to show you a quick image processing demo with Azure Batch. So let's have a look. So what I've got here is I've got a Docker file. Anybody come across ImageMagick? So it's like an image processing tool, very simple. But I've looked at it's actually a shell script here. I need to try and do this in Windows, but at the moment I've only got a Linux version. So it's resizing an image and doing some manipulation and overlay. And what it's actually going to do is overlay my Twitter handle onto some photos. You can see in the Docker file here, it's adding in my Twitter handle into the image. And all it's doing is calling that shell script and passing in, I'm going to pass in 3 parameters. So if I look at my Batch Shipyard, I've got my pools defined. You can spin up a pool on demand when we create these jobs, but I've pre-provisioned this. I've only got 8 VMs. It's a demo. In reality, you probably have hundreds. But the interesting thing is the job. So we have this thing called Task Factory. So what this does, it's going to connect to my Azure file share and iterate through all the images in that file share and create a task for every single image in that file share. Okay, so we could have thousands in there. I've got about 30, I think. It could also, you can do parameter task factories. So if you've got a parameter set, it can iterate through a parameter set to do different sort of things. And then it knows which command is going to be run. Okay, so it's going to take the file path from the Azure file share, obviously my Twitter handle, and then where I want my images to be output. So if I look on here, my output directory is currently empty, so I'm connected up to Azure files from my machine. My source images are here. Let's open one of these. Some holiday photos. Cool. Right, so, and what I need to do is come back over here. Azure Batch Shipyard is in Python. It's written in Python, so I need to switch to Bash, because I use Python on Bash. Hold on, where are we going? There we go. jump into my Python virtual environment, and I'm going to create a load of jobs. So I'm using shipyard jobs. It's path to my configuration files and my credentials. Okay, that's going to go and create all those jobs. So if I jump over to the portal and have a look at my batch account and have a look at the pool. So the pool is my VMs I pre-provisioned. We see they're currently idle. Hopefully, they're going to become busy in a moment. There we go, it's adding the jobs. Let's just close that and jump down to jobs. So if I go to jobs, see it's created this job, and it's iterated through that file share, or will do. It's been a little bit slow. Four minutes left. Trying to think, is there any session state that I need? I don't think so. It only normally takes a few seconds, this. Let's cancel out and just try and run it again. Is this hung? Should be using PowerShell. Let's try creating those jobs again. I've done this demo quite a few times and I've never known it not work. Adding job. I might just need to be patient. Just close that down. Silence. And what we should see is a load of jobs appear. That's good, that's good. Don't know how long to give it. Pool's good. I might have to skip this one. If anybody wants to see this work, it's a really nice demo. You might have to come to the stand. I'll be downstairs later on. Right, I'm going to wrap up and see if it gets on with that command before I wrap up. So in summary, what have I covered? I've covered infrastructure as a service and some of the partner solutions we can run, but there we have to manage VMs. So more and more we're starting to see these container solutions on Azure where we don't have to worry about the VMs. Container instances, no VMs at all. Fire up, forget about them. Azure Container Service, we get the orchestration in there when we start to work with microservices. Azure Container Service, sorry, that's what we're talking about. Azure Service Fabric, we more for Windows workloads, and we get the added programming models, .NET programming models. Web apps for containers, very easy to get containers up and running on a web application. Okay, we get those DevOps practices, those features auto-scaling, testing in production, etc. And Azure Batch for doing batch workloads. Got a few resources. Okay, and I'll bring this back up at the end. If you want to look at the different services, you can run containers on Azure, that top URL. Documentation's all there for all the different container services. Channel 9's got loads of great videos, especially these features are all coming out and changing every couple of weeks. There's lots of new videos on there. And Virtual Academy's got some training courses and things. Let's jump over and see if that's just hanging. How long have we got? About a minute. It's probably not going to finish in a minute. I haven't got. I could probably go in to fix it, but I'm not going to have time to do that. Let's just try one more. Let's just delete the jobs and just see if it runs one more time. Right, delete the job that I started to create. That's deleted. Create the jobs again. It normally just does it like that. So there's something underlying can't be quite right. Check my pool of VMs. VMs are all good. Just let me down. Yeah, I'm just going to have to move on. So, any questions? Any questions about anything we covered? Sorry, some of the demos don't work. I'm going to try and run through them on the stand later on as the day goes on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just interested in, I guess, the cool thing about running containers or microservices, at least in my opinion, is how you interconnect them, like the networking stack.
Yeah.
Can you say something like briefly comparing networking, service discovery, and the various options you've shown?
Yes, so most things have, so Azure Container Instances are just containers. Yeah, so they don't do it. Kubernetes and things, you've got service discovery in there. I guess Service Fabric has reverse proxy and things to enable containers inside to communicate. Web apps and things, there's none of that really. They're not intended to communicate outside of where they are. Does that sort of help? Yeah. So web apps are just to run on their own, but both the orchestrators, Service Fabric and ACS, they all have some way to do service discovery, but it's different depending on the product. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
In Service Fabric, you've got POS or POA now. They've renamed it to patch the underlying VMs.
Yep.
Have you got the same kind of functionality using ACS?
Azure Container Service, not at the moment. You have to manually upgrade the VMs, but watch this space. Okay, that's time's up. I've got another session downstairs now, and it's a case study with a customer who's actually taken a .NET application, containerized it, and are on the way to production with it. So, see you. Cool. Yeah.